Welcome to our Rainbow Studio. Here, as part of the Yahowah blog, when we're downstairs, we're typically covering Twistianity. And in this case, we're rejoining where we were a week ago when we covered the first 7 statements that are found in Romans, pursuant to one of the most utterly absurd tangents ever spoken by someone who was pretending to speak for God. In fact, it wasn't until Muhammad that we would experience a man of such ego and sexual perversity claiming to speak for God. And yet, that is exactly what Paul did. And in this case, he began by using this twisted analogy to say that a woman is somehow beholden to, and she is a slave to, the Torah of a man while she is married, and that she is liberated from it when the man dies. And he's all over the board, but of course, there is no Torah of the man. A woman is not tethered to a man in the Torah. There is no such thing as a woman being controlled by the Torah of a man anywhere to be found. So what Paul was promoting, of course, was what's known as the rational fallacy of the straw man. He was creating his own argument out of a pretense that doesn't exist. And we are now pursuing that to the point where Paul is now making it personal after he has wallowed all over all manner of rational deceptions and fallacies. He is bringing this home and he's revealing that he's a sexual pervert. He says that he would not have known that he was a sexual pervert if it hadn't been for the Torah revealing that the things he was doing were, well, grotesque. And so he's blaming the Torah, not himself, for his sexual perversions. It is a very odd position for anyone to take unless they are, well, as Paul's case, they were demon possessed. Now, there is more to all of this, and we're making fun of Paul. And the reason we're making fun of Paul is because he was the author of the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament. The whole myth of Jesus is predicated on Paul. The religion of Christianity is totally conceived by Paul. People don't know that today because there are 5 books that precede Paul's letters. But that's not how this all came to be. The first book of the Christian New Testament, from a chronological point of view, from the time that it was written, was Paul's letter to the Galatians, which is a book that we will dissect and destroy, really, in its entirety. The next 13 letters, books of the Christian New Testament, were all authored by Paul, every single one of them. There wouldn't be a gospel, which was Paul's term, by the way, until 2 of Paul's cronies, Mark and Luke, wrote these hearsay accounts based upon the creation of a false Messiah that Paul had conceived. And so Mark and Luke are nothing but the gospel, which was Paul's euangelion, according to Paul's mythology. And they were both written around 75 CE, likely in Rome, which is where Paul died in 66 CE. And neither person was in Jerusalem, not even probably in the province of Yahowah, Judah, when these events transpired, and that was 2 generations or 4 decades earlier. And then you have the book of Acts, which is Luke serving as Paul's propagandist, promoting everything that Paul did to create the religion of Christianity. So when it's all put in chronological order as the books were revealed, you have between 52 CE, when Paul invented the myth of Jesus and the religion of Christianity, The next 13 letters after that, 14 total, the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament, all authored by Paul, who committed every possible rational fallacy, who never once quoted the alleged gospel Jesus a single time. The reason he couldn't quote gospel Jesus is he didn't exist, and he wouldn't exist until a decade after Paul's death with the creation of Mark and Luke. And each time that he quotes God, Yahowah, to prove his point, he takes the passage out of context, misrepresents it, and twists it to the point that his conclusions are the opposite of what God actually said. So he never once quotes God accurately, never even once uses Yahweh's name, which also proves that he's a complete fraud. So he is absolutely not representing God because he never once quotes him accurately. And he is not representing the pretense of a Jesus Christ since he never once quotes him at all. So this is the reality. And it's one that Christians just do not understand. They've been played for fools. And they, of course, have no concept that Paul, in his second letter to Corinth, actually admitted that he was demon possessed. And they can't process any of this information. And they go on continuing to parrot the lie that there was a Jesus Christ, but there was no such individual. Now, not only does this, therefore, assessment of Paul's continued rational fallacies and overt corruption of God's testimony, even sexual perversions, therefore free Christians from that diabolical lie of Christianity. But long time ago, I would say it's at least 10 to 15 years ago, I came to realize that Paul was actually the model for the Torahless one, for the great betrayer of Israel and the world that would be Satan incarnate, that would appear in the last days. He would appear 7 years prior to Yahweh's return, commiserate with the celebration of Shabuah, which is now just a matter of months from now. That's why I've been able to identify him, because the prophets were right clear as to who he was. And what I said 10, 15 years ago is that there will be very little difference between the personality, attitude, and approach of Paul and this person who Christians would know as the Antichrist, but who was presented as the living incarnation of Satan during the last days. And indeed, we have a man who is a world leader who is now known for his sexual perversions. Pedophile, he's a rapist, and hung with a best friend that is the most famous pedophile and rapist the world has ever known. And he is also an egomaniacal fool. I don't think the world has ever seen a more egotistical man than Donald Trump, who is this very character. And he is a warmonger, doing everything he can to ignite wars and world war around the world. And the more that he is accused of all manner of crimes, the more chaos he's going to create. And so, based upon the timing and what the prophets have said, I was able not only to deduce that Donald Trump is the essentially the embodiment of Paul, who was also demon possessed, just as is Donald Trump, which explains his outlandish statements and behaviors. But just as Paul was a confabulator, very little correlation between what Paul said and reality, so is Donald Trump. And so by understanding the rhetoric and style and attitude and approach, the twisted perversions of the truth by Paul and his attitude, we come to better understand this character that is now Donald Trump, the demon-possessed great betrayer. But also at that time, what I said, and now we are seeing manifest. And by the way, because I'm a student of Yahweh's prophets and understand them better than anyone probably has in the last 2,500 years, I'm able to deduce what is going to transpire that has an influence either on Israel, Yehudim, Jews, or on the world as it would pertain to this time of trouble for Israel and the players that will influence this carnage that we're going to witness going forward. And I have been with hundreds upon hundreds of predictions, 100% accurate. And one of the things I said 10 to 15 years ago is that Christians will actually embrace this man that, that they have long sought to know as the Antichrist, that the one who is demon possessed, who is betraying them and God and everyone else, including God's people, will actually be viewed as if he were a Messiah to them, as if he were godly to them. They would worship him, they would pray for him, they would bow to him, they would honor him. And that's exactly what we're seeing Christian MAGAs do to Donald Trump and with Donald Trump. So in Paul, we are witnessing another demon possessed man. And while Donald Trump won't have the influence that Paul had, because Paul's influence, he created a religion with billions of followers. So Paul has had the greatest negative influence on the world, and a religion where Paul came up with the nonsense that Jews killed his God. Now, he came up with the nonsense that God was a man. That's stupid. God's not a man. God cannot be a man. He came up with the nonsense that men killed God and blamed Jews for it. That's also nonsense. He also came up with the nonsense of the cross being an object of worship when it's nothing but pagan idolatry, and that everything Yahowah said was untrue, and he called Yahowah's Towrah pornography, and said that he had replaced all of it with "but I, Paul, say." That Christians have no concept of how stupid it is to believe this man, and how utterly foolish they are to believe that there was a Jesus Christ. The fact of the matter is that the person worshiped today as Jesus Christ, that name did not exist until the 17th century. 1629 is the first time that Jesus was ever written. And previously, he was known as Iusus, Iusun, Iusu, Christone, Christou, or Christos. And there was nobody by that name that lived in first century Judea. It's complete fabrication. But you can't create a myth this popular without drawing on something that people believe to be true or that they have somehow heard. And that was the case with Paul. He created his Iusu Christou out of a false god and a true Messiah, the actual Messiah, Son of God, and returning king, Dowd David, is the one who actually suffered crucifixion in 33 CE to fulfill Pesach, and he's the one who carried our guilt into Sheol on Matzah, to present us as not guilty before God, that would enable us on firstborn children to become part of the covenant family. Dowd himself had written about all of this in his Mizmor. Really, most of them either boldly state that he did this or hint at it throughout their entirety. And he even gave the exact date that he would fulfill Chag Matzah in 33 CE when speaking to Daniel as Gabor El, God's most courageous and competent man. And he even went as far as to describing precisely the way that crucifixion, which hadn't been invented at the time that he wrote the 22nd Psalm, would kill, describing scientifically and medically the consequence of crucifixion. 500-600 years before crucifixion was even invented, and even before Rome existed. So this is a pretty extraordinary prophecy, particularly the one that gave the exact date that he would fulfill these things. But no one pays any attention to the truth because Paul's lies, counterfeiting what Dowd achieved, the product of identity theft by stealing that which belongs to the actual Son of God and Messiah, our returning King Dowd, now is believed by a ratio of close to 1,000,000 to 1 over the truth. Lies are extremely pervasive. And the other, because Dowd's life was not enough to create a religion, and if you just left it at that, people would say, well, you're just copying what was said about David. Paul also created his myth of Iousu Christou on the pagan lore of Dionysus. Dionysus was the son of Zeus. He was viewed as a man god who was born on the winter solstice, December 25th, and who died and was resurrected each year in the spring during the Sunday nearest the vernal equinox, creating the whole festival that became Easter around the Dionysian mysteries. So the turning a god into a man and celebrating an annual birth of a baby god and then a resurrection from death, he stole from Dionysus. The rest he stole as a product of identity theft from David. So this is the nature of Christianity, whether you know it or not, is immaterial to me, immaterial to the truth. The fact of the matter is, truth is truth, and religion is religion, and never the two will meet. So continuing now with the next statement that Paul ushered in Romans to establish his overall lie, and we have Qara, who's our little pup, is having some kind of a tussle with Wookiee over something that she thinks is important. So please excuse the barking dog and in the background. It reads, "But now the opportunity to excuse and the pretext, the basis for starting this whole point and creating the opportune circumstance to grasp hold of an experience, to select and be exploited by that which is evil, sinful, and wrong, came through the commandment, and it was brought about thoroughly in me, including every and all deep desire and longing." So what Paul is saying here is that the I'm going to assume 10 commandments. So the fact of the matter is, if you're actually up to speed with what God had to say, there are no commandments. There are 3 sweeping statements about God that are universally opposed to every religion, and there are 7 instructions that follow. There isn't a commandment in the lot of them. But Paul, being a rabbi, of course, wanted to make the Torah law when it means teaching and instruction, and he wanted to make the overall statements and instructions that God provided into commandments. That's what the religious like to do. So he is saying here it was the commandments that God said, for example, honor your mother and father, don't bear false witness, don't commit murder, don't covet your neighbor's wife, those kinds of things. Don't commit adultery, and adultery here in God's parlance would be cheating on him through religion. He says it was those things, God's instructions. And the first 3 would be that Yahowah alone is God, and that he is a liberator, one that frees us from religious and political oppression. Number 2 says, do not be religious. Don't spend any time around the religious. Don't have any religious objects in your life. Don't speak for religious gods. Do nothing that is associated with religion, because through religion, fathers corrupt their sons to the 3rd and 4th generation. And as a result, there's only thousands amongst billions who will receive the benefits of my covenant by being observant of its terms and conditions. And the third one says, there is no excuse and there is no forgiveness for those who negate the value of Yahweh's name, which of course is pervasive in Christianity, because you will not find Yahweh's name once in the Christian New Testament. So the entire religion exists to negate the value of Yahweh's name, as does Judaism, as does Islam. The three Abrahamic religions all are proven false because they violate the third statement that Yah etched in stone. So Paul is saying that the opportunity came about as a pretext for him to experience that which is evil, sinful, and wrong, that which was misleading and errant and offensive, and it all came through the commandments. Had God not etched those 10 statements in stone, that Paul would be pristine, he would be truthful, and he wouldn't be a sexual pervert. However, because God said the things that he wrote on those 10 statements, that is what caused Paul to be a sexual pervert and to be a disagreeable, dishonest liar. Now, if you believe that's true, then you could call yourself a Christian. If you know that's not true, then you'd be a fool to continue to be a Christian, because that is what this man wrote. He said that the very statements of God are the reasons that he had the deep desire and longing to be corrupt, to be perverted, to be dishonest. That is the ultimate in projection, saying what you are and projecting it on another. For indeed, without the Torah, he wrote, that which is misleading, errant, and offensive is dead and no longer an issue. This is Romans 7:8. So he went one step further. It's not just the commandments. No, it was the commandments. They're the ones that without them, I wouldn't have been a sexual pervert. I would not have been dishonest and corrupt. So it's the commandments that cause the longing in me to be a piece of crap as a human being. But then he went one step further. He says, without the Torah, that which is misleading and errant and offensive, about Paul, all of which is everything he wrote, is dead and no longer an issue. In other words, you would have no basis for calling Paul a liar, to call Paul deadly, to acknowledge that Paul was demon-possessed and lying about everything, including Jesus Christ, if it were not for the Torah. And that he's partly right.
So the Torah condemns me. Please don't listen to the Torah.
That is correct. It's what Rich just said is the Torah condemns Paul. Therefore, if you want to believe Paul, you must negate the Torah, because the Torah says the opposite of what Paul says. Now, that puts Christians in a very difficult position, because there's no question that God, name is Yahowah, authored the Torah. And if God since God authored the Torah and he proved his authorship through prophecy, then that which disagrees with it has to be false. You certainly cannot claim that the God who authored the Torah, as Paul does, is the God who authorized you and yet condemn the Torah and contradict everything he said. But that's what Christianity does. That's what makes Christianity so irrational. I mean, literally, you cannot be an informed and rational Christian. It's impossible. So he's saying here that, is the Torah that made Paul misleading, errant, and offensive. And without the Torah, that those things would not be. We have a serious problem with our cords here. We have Qara literally chewing on the power supply to the computer. She's already twisted the screen that reflects in the teleprompter so that I can read these statements and be as accurate as possible. Thank you, Rich, for repositioning it. And now she has a mouthful of power cord. Puppies are wonderful. My wife thought that because our previous puppy, this would be Wookiee, who she got because she wanted a dog that loved her as much as her former Gucci did, which was the exact same breed. And that when Gucci decided, he wanted to hang with the guys, and he wanted to, well, as you can see, here he was right here on the table. He goes everywhere with me, and Leia said, now I need a dog that was going to favor me over you. And I said, that's fine, but I'm not going to be mean to your new dog. It's not my fault that you're thank you that dogs like me because I'm nice to them. I really do. I enjoy the company of the dogs. I think they're very sweet animals. And you can see this one doing the beard snuffle. So now we have Qara because she was insistent that she have a dog that was hers and not shared. And well,
She loves you, though.
here we go. So this is our reality. But anyway, so Paul has made a statement that among any informed and rational person would immediately cause them to renounce Paul. Therefore, renounce the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament. Therefore, renounce Mark, Luke, and Acts because they were written by Paul's associates. And to recognize that the religion that they created is nothing but a colossal lie. Now, beyond the fact that there are no commandments, but instead 3 statements and 7 instructions, not one of them says, you will not lust, crave, desire long, or have uncontrollable urges. There is none which speaks of restraining a person's capacity to engage in sexual perversions or licentiousness either. The 10 statements do not mention sexuality in any way, shape, or form. In fact, God's got very little to say about sexuality. Other than incest is bad, rape is bad, pedophilia is bad, and bestiality is really, really bad. God doesn't say much about sexuality. He has no problem with us having more than one, or in some cases, countless sexual partners, so long as we're a decent human being and it's all mutually acceptable. This is the truth. That people may not want to hear it, but that is reality. So there is no statement that speaks of licentiousness or sexual perversion among those 10 statements. And there's nothing in the Torah that would speak of it either, unless Paul is claiming that the very things that he would not have known were bad if the Torah hadn't said so, that Paul would be doing those things, which is incest, pedophilia, rape, bestiality. And there is a misunderstanding of the statements on homosexuality that actually speak of taking advantage of a fallen soldier, which is the context that it was written in, and sodomizing that individual. So Paul was either guilty of those things or a misunderstanding of those things, or the Torah, he was just lying because the Torah has nothing to say about what he was claiming. So, not, by the way, also, there wasn't a single instruction that wasn't written in the imperfect conjugation. And that speaks of ongoing and habitual behavior without reference to time, which means that if you commit murder, if you bear false witness, if you do the kinds of things, if you steal, do the kinds of things that Yahowah said don't do. If you were religious, for example, if you negated the value of Yahowah's name by not knowing it, by not proclaiming it, the moment you stop, you are no longer subject to that advice. You are no longer guilty of failing in that regard. So it is the advantage of the imperfect, which means it is habitually killing, habitually stealing, habitually lying, that gets you in trouble, and habitually being religious. So that the moment you stop, you're good to go to the next step. You're free of that criticism. from God. So, additionally, we would say that reasonable people realize that a document which discourages harmful behaviors does not facilitate them, as Paul is claiming. As such, Paul's position was self-exposing and condemning, but also irrational. Now, also relevant, adultery, murder, lying, and stealing don't go away by discarding the book which opposes these things. In other words, if you are a thief and you find a way to destroy all copies of the Torah which speaks against thievery, it doesn't change the fact that you're a thief. But that's Paul's argument nonetheless. So if everyone ignored the Torah, there would be more adverse behavior, not less. Moral individuals the world over have always known that murder, lying, and stealing are wrong. However, since Paul has been fixated on his lustful urges, since he never was married, and since the only person he admits to sexually loving, or at least loving, was a young boy named Timothy, whose genitals he was fixated over and personally circumcised, which is quite an admission, certainly suggests that he was a homosexual. Especially since he said that his sexual urges were not only uncontrollable, but that he was motivated to do what the Torah disproves, at least from his perspective. And in the most specific rebuke of Paul, that's found in the book of Habakkuk, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd chapters, what we find is that God himself, 666 years before Paul would write his first letter to the Galatians, condemned Paul by name and said that he was overly fixated on the male genitalia. So that would sort of be...
I have a question.
Yes,
Did
sir.
he use the rabbinic technique to circumcise Timothy?
Well, I have no clue. But he was trained as a rabbi. Oh,
That technique.
The technique of the chompers, huh?
Which
Wow.
is how some rabbis, some Hasidics.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that would be extremely perverted, and I do not like the sight of that in my mind. Sam, I am. You don't need to make these kind of contributions. Way too much information. Okay. I suspect that we are witnessing yet another confession within Paul, as usual, rather than blaming himself for his licentiousness, for his out-of-control sexual perversion, that Paul is simply blaming God. He is inferring that it is God who made him a pervert. Now, as an interesting aside, Yahowah does not actually condemn homosexuality, as I have said in his Torah. Only incest, pedophilia, rape, bestiality, and prostitution, as well as necrophilia. That's the one that I had forgotten. God does not want us engaged in any sexual act that would pertain to incest. Really bad. I mean, that messes up kids hugely, but it's all the way through the process. No mommy, no daddy, no sister, no children. So no incest, no pedophilia, no rape. Boy, that would get rid of the Donald. I mean, he's wanted to have sex with his daughter. He did have sex with children, and he raped a woman. So the Donald would be in real trouble. Bestiality, which would pretty much 86 a lot of Muslims. Prostitution, which, well, that would also get the Donald too, wouldn't it? And necrophilia. Necrophilia is so bad in the Islamic world that they actually have to put locks on access to the buried children of men, because fathers would go in and rape their dead daughters. So it's a really sick kind of a thing. So as you will discover throughout Yahowah, the passages which otherwise are errantly translated, we try to make a correction, because God's position on sexuality is very different than it's conveyed in Christianity that was perverted by Paul. Now, that is not to say that many homosexuals are not tormented by their sexual orientation, and many are, and that the effect it has is can be negative on their lives and their family. But I'm very keen to adjusting my attitude so that it reflects God's attitude, and I have no issue with having very close friends who are homosexuals. I don't understand it, don't want to know anything about it, as I recoiled with Rich's Haredi claim on circumcision. To me, girls are beautiful, but I'm not here to judge others and what they prefer to do sexually, so long as it doesn't violate the things that Yahowah had to say on necrophilia, prostitution, bestiality, incest, pedophilia, and rape. So the passages, by the way, which are claiming that homosexuality is wrong, are actually mistranslated. So speaking of Paul's obvious sexual conflict, a few chapters hence, we will discover that through his prophetic warning against Shaul, Yahowah exposed Paul's fascination, as I have shared, with the male genitalia, exactly, by the way, 666 years before Paul wrote his first letter to the Galatians, which is a pretty good clue. And he actually named Paul by name and designated that he would be appealing to Gentiles, that he made the claim that God actually could be killed, which Habakkuk says, is he out of his mind? You can't die, God. But anyway, it's an interesting read, and I will share it in its completeness with you on a future rendition of Twistianity. So it's almost as if God read Paul's letters before commenting on them, and that he came to the same conclusion. So, mind you, so long as he was not a rapist, incestuous, or a pedophile, and was the case with Muhammad, Shaul's sexual orientation is irrelevant up to a point. It becomes fair game, however, when he denounces what he himself practices, whether that be homosexuality or promiscuity. Beyond this, since Paul's is fast becoming a model for the man known as the Antichrist, Donald Trump, it is relevant to note that he will be a sexual pervert. Now, on the subject of gaiety, which we are to make, what are we to make really of the connection between Paul's uncontrollable lusts and the charities known as the gratia or graces in Rome, which Paul built his whole evangelion, gospels, around the graces, these charities, these naked goddesses of frivolity, sexual frivolity. After all, the naked beauties were the pagan embodiment of lasciviousness, and they became the essence of Paul's gospels, the gospel of grace. They are the gratia in Latin. As Paul would write in Greek, they are the charities. He had the gospel of the charities, the pagan embodiment of fornication. The indulgent and unrestrained one's fixation on death continues, along with his animosity towards God's Towrah. He would write in the next sentence, presented in his letter to the Romans on behalf of Rome, the beast of Rome. So then I was living apart from and without the Towrah. But once having happened upon the commandment, the evil sin sprung to life again. He just won't leave it alone. One of the things that I learned about Satan, and I'm pretty much the foremost authority on Satan in the world today, know him better than anybody else. He is the adversary, is my adversary. We have agreed to disagree on everything, but I understand him really well. Translating the book of Ezekiel, which is his autobiography and playbook, certainly helped me understand it, but there's nothing that prepares one to understand who Satan is and what his agenda is than writing books on the Quran, of which I've written 4,200 pages. So I know this beast really well, and I know the nature of the spirit that demon-possessed Paul, who he admits, as I said in the second letter to the Corinthians, as a messenger, a demon from Satan. And one of the things that I have come to know is that those who are demon possessed are insistent upon denouncing Yahweh's Torah and denouncing his people, which is what Paul did. If you can denounce the Torah, denounce Yehudim, Jews, denounce the covenant or replace the covenant, denounce the Moedim, which Paul said if you attend them, then you have no hope of salvation. He would even go so far as to say that if you're circumcised, which by the way he was, and so was Timothy, that you have no hope of salvation, which God says if you're not circumcised as a man, you cannot participate in Passover. You can't participate in Passover. You have no way of benefiting from the door to life being opened when Dowd was crucified in 33 CE for that purpose. So it is a wicked web that they have woven. So what Shaul is saying, as I was living apart from the Torah, and that's clear. As a rabbi, he was far more interested in the Talmud. And the Torah was something to dress. The rabbis dress it up as a whore and parade it around. And the reason they dress it up as a whore and pretend to be Torah observant when they're actually Talmud observant is the Torah's presentation of Jews is horrid. I mean, absolutely horrid. I mean, it starts really with Abraham pimping Sarah out for lammies. That's not good. And then you have Yishak being hoodwinked into providing the blessing to the wrong son. And then you have that wrong son who was scheming in all manner of ways. And his 12 kids start off as obnoxious and go downhill from there. He was loving the wrong woman, a woman who had a fascination with idols. And it just almost nothing about Jacob works. And once you have the sons that become Yisrael, they immediately go into conniving mode. And then by the time you enter the time in Mitzrayim, when Moshe tries to save them from their plight, they turn on him. And then when Moshe and Yahowah released them from slavery and apartheid and genocide, they turn on them. It's so bad that Moshe said, God, why don't you just kill me? These people are impossible. And that's just a few days after leaving Choreb. In fact, while they were still in Choreb, they were building a religious idol, that golden calf. You could not have a more obnoxious group of people, and it goes all the way through, even to the waters of Meribah that were so revolting in every instance pursuant to God. And so the Torah is not this great ode to how wonderful Jews are. It's a condemnation of Yisrael and Yehudim and how they antagonize God in every possible way. And so rabbis, of which Paul was, they distance themselves from the Torah by pretending that their Talmud is an oral Torah. Of course, it didn't exist. The Talmud didn't begin to take place until the 2nd century in Jerusalem with a very crude Jerusalem Talmud, and then really not into the Talmud that Jews study today, which is the Babylonian Talmud. Babylon should have given you a clue, which was written between 400 and 500 CE. So we're dealing with 2,000 years after the actual Torah was written as a written document between Yahowah, Moshe, and the world. So as a rabbi, he can write, I was living apart from and without the Torah, because all religious Jews are, all of them. And the more religious they are, the more apart from and without the Torah they are. when they claim to be Torah observant and they give all this lip service to the Torah, they're strictly speaking of the Talmud. But once having happened apart from the commandment, the evil sin sprung to life again. So he's saying that he had to study the Torah again to try to hoodwink people into believing. But Paul say in his Evangelion gospel to the gratis, the Greek charities, and as he read it, trying to steal from it and pilfer from it, it became obvious that, yep, he was in fact a sexual pervert. So he was doing one or more of the things that God condemns: bestiality, incest, pedophilia. Who knows how old Timothy was? He was necrophilia. He was guilty of one or more of those things. And it sprung to life within him. If that's your witness, then you probably like the Quran, because Muhammad was admittedly, by the Quran and Hadith, a sexual pervert. He had sex with a 6-year-old girl when he was 66 years old. That would qualify, right? He raped the women of the men he killed routinely. So you know, you like sexual perverts and you believe they speak for God, you'll love the Quran, and you probably like the Christian New Testament. Not for me. Anyway, they say that confession is good for the soul, but methinks this isn't helping Paul. Paul has again admitted that he is evil and that sin is thriving within him, having sprung to life, and he is operationally offensive and functionally errant. And listen, the fact that Paul's a sexual pervert and admitting it, I really don't care. If Paul hadn't created a religion by robbing the actual Son of God and Messiah, Dowd, who is our Savior, I wouldn't really give two hoots about him. But he has created a religion, the most popular in the world, that actually robs David, of his titles and his achievements, and therefore robs the world of the knowledge of everything that Dowd has achieved, stealing his accomplishments, while also robbing people of an awareness of Yahowah's name. And for those things, I will personally conduct his trial. And after holding him in contempt and making certain that those he abused get to have full closure by witnessing his recompense sevenfold for what he has done, then I'm going to send him to Sheol, which he at least got naming rights. Sheol and Shaul is the same word in Hebrew. But you can be assured that I have been granted the right to condemn Paul. Actually, he condemned himself, but I get to send him to hell, and will. So if you want to believe him, if you want to tout his religion, and you want to promote it, where I am exposed to what you have said, I'll gladly do the same for you. So if we're to believe Paul, a mythical commandment saying, "Thou wilt not be passionate, indulgent, lustful, or sexually perverted," killed him, even though he seems almost coherent and thus still conscious. So then I died when was found in me the commandment with reference to living. This brought death. Excuse me. There is, first of all, there are no commandment amongst the 3 statements and 7 instructions. Second, there is no commandment that is in reference to living. Unless you were to say that, take Haya, which means to exist, where God in the first statement says, "I am Yahowah, your God, who liberated you from slavery, and you will not exist with other gods in my presence." I guess that could be twisted to speak about living, but that's not good. In the second statement, where God says, "Don't be religious, don't do anything that could be even conceived as being religious, and don't have any affinity for any religious icon," like the Star of David, which has nothing to do with David, by the way, or the a Christian cross or those sorts of things. Don't be religious, because fathers corrupt their sons to the third and fourth generation, and it's only thousands amongst billions, which is 1 in a million, are going to receive the benefits of the covenant by being particularly observant of its terms and conditions. That doesn't really mention living either. And the instruction on Yahweh's name simply says that there will be no forgiveness for those who denounce or demean Yahweh's name, which would be all Christians, all Muslims, and all practicing Jews that are Haredi or ultra-Orthodox or any Jew. They will never say Yahweh's name, which means it's taking it for naught. So all religious Jews, all Muslims, all Christians would be guilty of the third statement that Yahweh etched in stone, which he said there is no forgiveness for doing that. But that doesn't speak of life or death. That means that you will not be invited into heaven, and it, depending on whether or not your crime was serious or just inadvertent, if you were played for a fool rather than being the fool, then you could have eternal life, but in Sheol. So those things do not speak of bringing death in reference. So there is nothing in the first three that reference living. There's nothing in the instruction regarding the promise of 7, the Shabbat, that references living. And then in the next 6 of them, the instructions are very short and sweet, and they say don't make a habit of doing things like stealing or committing false witness or killing or coveting, but they say nothing about that either. So Paul again has what's called a straw man. This is a rational fallacy that he is promoting. Now, if he is basing his religion on rational fallacies, then you would be a fool to believe him. Just saying. For indeed, this evil sin took hold of this opportunity through the commandment to thoroughly deceive and completely beguile me, and so through it, it killed. Romans 7:11. Again, we are 11 statements into the 7th chapter of Romans. And with every statement, Paul has proven emphatically that he cannot be trusted. Therefore, he did not speak for God. Therefore, the religion he created and the God he conceived are false. And that God is known today as Jesus Christ. And that religion is known as Christianity. And Paul, in the first 11 statements, each of them independently and collectively proved that he will commit every possible rational fallacy to justify his new religion. And it's deadly. So here he said that indeed this evil sin, which Paul says was entirely the result of the commandment. It took the opportunity through the commandment to thoroughly deceive and completely beguile me. So Paul's not admitting, which is obvious, that he is the deceiver who is beguiling billions because he is contrary to Yahweh's instructions. He is saying that Yahweh's instructions are beguiling him. Now, how is it possible when, if you read any one of those 10 statements in the original Hebrew, there isn't a single statement that could be construed this way? As a matter of fact, there is one that says, don't beguile. Don't bear false witness, which is what Paul's doing right here. So, in this statement alone, Paul is admitting that God's instructions are deadly, and that the summation of God's instructions, which would be the 10 statements that he etched and stoned, killed him. And by the way, he's even wrong in that. The 10 statements that God etched and stoned didn't kill Paul. They destroyed his religion. They killed the myth of Jesus, but they didn't kill Paul. I'm here to tell you that Paul's soul will never die. It will be tormented in Sheol forever. he will wish that this was true. But I will assure you, it will not be. So this might be a good place for us to stop. I have more commentary and thoughts on this and others as we go forward with Paul's rant in the book that he wrote to his Roman overlords. But I think this is a good place for us to conclude this program, and we'll return to this subject more quickly than we did with the last intermission of, I think, over a week's time pursuant to it, because this is just such an interesting way that anyone who is informed now and rational can shed the lie that is Christianity, can be divorced of the myth that is Jesus Christ, and come to be free of that horrible religion and free of the lies of Paul and the Christian New Testament. Because once you're free of those things, you're in a position to actually know who Yahweh is, what he's offering, and what he expects in return. And all of this, if you want to have absolute proof that what I'm sharing with you is true, you can go to yahowah.com. Yada, to know, Yah, YAH.com, where all of the 35 books in their entirety that I have written are absolutely free to you. Yahowah.com, you'll find all 35 books. You'll find the various places where the Yahowah vlog is posted. And those books are presented in their entirety in page turners, which are really fun to read. I think it's a marvelous way of looking at books on your phone or a tablet or your computer. And we even make those page turners such that you can copy and paste from them, put that copy and paste into a search engine and validate the translations for yourself, or go ahead and verify anything that I have shared. It's something most people won't do. But the books are free and available in their entirety, both as page turners and as PDFs, if that's the way that you'd prefer to read them. And also, if you want to go and have a paperback version or hardback version of these books, they're royalty free at Amazon.com. So lots of ways for you to validate all of this. It's all served up for you to read for yourself, to shed your ignorance, to become rational. Your soul's worth it. And so we will return to this material, hopefully on a day later this week. So thank you for listening.